This video demonstrates a data flow diagram created on a Windows 11 computer using WinAND. Similar capabilities exist in Mac A&D running on a Mac OS computer. A data flow diagram typically starts with a context diagram and a single process that represents the system that's being modeled. Data flows into the process or out of the process with data flows that are connected to external entities representing the external world that's interacting with this process. The main bubble representing the system being modeled can be split into separate pieces of that process on a child diagram. If we double click, we're taken to the child diagram where we see that that process has been split into multiple smaller processes. We have data flowing between those different smaller processes, and also the same data that was flowing in and out of our main process at the parent level is also flowing in and out from this child diagram. To return back to the parent process, we can shift double click on white space and we're taken back to the parent process, or again to go to a child diagram, double click on the process. The modeling process continues as we split large processes into child diagrams represented by multiple smaller processes. The same data flows into the child diagram as shown on the parent process, and likewise the same data out of the child diagram as shown in the parent diagram. We continue that process for as many levels as we need until each individual process can be described with a short textual description. And here we see a text specification where we simply describe what that process does with the data that comes in and the data that goes out. In addition to double-clicking on a bubble to see the child diagram or shift double-clicking white space to go back to the parent diagram, you can select a diagram within the contents view to view that specific diagram. We see that in this DFD document, there's 4 individual diagrams. We can create additional diagrams by clicking at the very bottom left. And here we see there is a plus sign where we can click and add a new diagram. So let's just call this test. And we can set how many horizontal or vertical pages we want in this diagram. So here we can see we've increased the drawing surface of this diagram into multiple horizontal and vertical pages. To add objects on the diagram, we use the tools at the left-hand edge. For example, to add a process, we click on the process tool, click somewhere in the diagram, and we're presented with a dialog where we can name the process. When we name this process object, there are 2 names. There is the main name that becomes a dictionary entry in our data dictionary, and then a corresponding name, which is the displayed name that could be somewhat different, could have a space in it, for example, and that names the object on the diagram itself. So we've added a process. We can move the process to a different location. We can add a data store, which is a object that stores information. Again, it has a dictionary entry and associated displayed name. And we can add a data flow where data flows from this object to the data store. So we're going to add a flow from process over to the store, and we're going to call this flow 1. Let's add another flow to our diagram. So we'll start our flow on this data store and click in white space, and we'll click on the process and we'll call this flow tool 2. So we have process, a data store, and a flow going from the process to the data store, and another flow going from the data store back to the process. We can select a process and bring up the properties dialog, and let's have this explode to a child diagram. So if we double click on or select new diagram and click OK, now we've added a child diagram under our process, and from the options menu we select parent attachments, and it brings down the data flows that are going into and out of that selected process up at the parent level. Diagrams within WinA&D generally have associated dictionary entries with objects on the diagram. For example, let's start with this diagram, and if we look at this business document data flow, so we can see by selecting that, if we go to the dictionary, there's an associated dictionary entry called business documents, and it's composed of several different parts. Each part is itself an individual dictionary entry. For example, if we wanted to look at this part, we could click on the 3 dots and it takes us to that entry within the data dictionary. And we can use the back and forth arrows to navigate back and forth through our navigation history within the dictionary entries. The data dictionary becomes a repository of detailed information behind the diagrams. This can be useful during the process of decomposing large processes into smaller processes, because we can also do that with the data itself. For example, if we had a flow named business document going into a bubble, and then we break that bubble into a child diagram showing the individual parts, we could have the various component parts of that flow going in or out of that child diagram, and yet the data balances between the different diagram levels. To summarize, the data flow diagram can be used to understand and analyze virtually any kind of complex application or system. We start with a context diagram that shows the entire system as a named process with data flowing into and out of that process from the external world. We then split that complex process into smaller parts, maintaining the balance of information flowing in and out of the diagram from the parent to the child diagram, and continue that process until we end up with small processes that can be fully described with a small text specification. As we're doing the process of analyzing our system, we're creating an associated data dictionary entry with entries for every process name, every data flow name, and within the dictionary, we can further decompose large data flows into their component parts.